It began like every other night flight. 239 people, one Boeing 777, a routine route from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. At 12:41 a.m., flight MH370 lifted into the humid Malaysian sky, its lights flickering faintly against the dark stretch of the South China Sea. But less than an hour later, it vanished. No distress call, no radar contact, no wreckage, just gone. At 1:21 a.m., Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah's voice came through the radio one final time. "Good night, Malaysian 370. Those were the last words anyone ever heard from the flight. Minutes later, the aircraft's transponder went dark. Military radar caught a blip turning sharply west off course, before fading entirely. From that moment on, nothing made sense. Search teams scoured the ocean for years. Governments issued reports that contradicted themselves. Debris washed ashore thousands of miles away, but never enough to explain the truth. Because somewhere between the official timelines, the missing satellite data, and the fragments that didn't fit, a different story began to surface. A story of silence, manipulation, and information that was never meant to reach the public eye. This isn't just about a plane that disappeared. It's about what disappeared with it. And tonight, we're going to find out why. In the early hours of March 8th, 2014, Kuala Lumpur International Airport buzzed with the quiet rhythm of routine. Passengers moved through security with sleepy indifference. Business travelers, families, students heading home for spring break. No one knew they were boarding one of the most mysterious flights in modern history. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, a Boeing 777-200ER, was scheduled for 6 hours and 28 minutes. On board, 227 passengers, 12 crew members, and over 200 tons of fuel. The night was clear. The takeoff, flawless. At 1:07 a.m., the plane sent its final automated data burst through the ACARS system. A normal scheduled transmission. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming. 14 minutes later, the system went silent. At 1:19 a.m., the co-pilot, Farik Hamid, made routine contact with Malaysian Air Traffic Control. "Good night, Malaysian 370. 2 minutes later, MH370 crossed from Malaysian into Vietnamese airspace and vanished from civilian radar. Not gradually, instantly. One moment it was there, transponder active, signal stable. The next, it was gone. No mayday, no warning, no sign of mechanical failure. But military radar, and operating on a separate frequency, picked up something extraordinary. The plane had turned. A sharp bank to the left, cutting back across the Malaysian peninsula, heading west. Not north toward Beijing, but west, toward the Indian Ocean. Investigators would later confirm the turn was controlled. No sign of chaos, no struggle, no mechanical drift. Someone human was flying that plane. What happened in those minutes between the final radio call and the disappearance remains one of the most unsettling mysteries of the century. Because the systems didn't just fail, they were switched off, one by one. And the deeper investigators dug, the clearer it became. This was not a simple aviation accident. This was something else, something deliberate. In that silence, 239 lives were erased, not by fate, but by intent. And from that moment on, the search for truth would be fought not just across oceans, but across politics, power, and the limits of what the public was allowed to know. When MH370 disappeared, the world watched in disbelief. A commercial jet, the size of a football field, had simply vanished. No wreckage, no oil slick, no distress signal. In the first 24 hours, Malaysian authorities hesitated. They delayed search efforts, issued conflicting statements, and, most crucially, focused in the wrong direction. They searched east toward Vietnam, where the plane was supposed to be headed, while military radar data already showed it had turned west. For days, that information was withheld, even from the families, even from international investigators. It wasn't until March 15th, a full week later, that Malaysian officials finally admitted, "We have reason to believe the aircraft's communication systems were deliberately disabled." That phrase, deliberately disabled, changed everything. The world realized this wasn't just a crash. It was an operation. But who was behind it? And why? Satellite data from Inmarsat revealed a faint series of hourly pings, electronic handshakes between the plane and the satellite. The pattern showed MH370 had continued flying for nearly 7 hours after disappearing from radar. 7 hours across one of the most isolated regions of the planet. Based on those pings, investigators traced 2 possible arcs, one north toward Central Asia and one south, deep into the Indian Ocean. Malaysia, along with the US and Australia, quickly agreed. The plane went south. But the evidence was thin. A handful of automated signals, interpreted by algorithms that only a few experts understood. No cockpit voice recorder, no flight data, no human confirmation. And yet, the world accepted it. The narrative was set, but not everyone believed it. Independent analysts began uncovering contradictions in the official data. Military radar logs didn't match civilian records. Satellite timestamps had been adjusted, and the raw data, the original transmissions, were never released to the public. The result? Every version of the truth had to be filtered through official channels. Every fact became a statement of trust. Meanwhile, the search, one of the largest in aviation history, began to look less like investigation and more like performance. Over $160 million spent, vast areas of the ocean scanned by sonar, but the wreckage remained elusive. Then, in July 2015, more than a year after the disappearance, something surfaced. A single wing fragment, a flaperon, washed ashore on Reunion Island, thousands of miles from where the plane was last tracked. Officials confirmed it belonged to MH370. To the world, it was closure. To investigators, it was confusion, because the ocean currents didn't match the debris condition. The flaperon showed signs of controlled descent, not a violent crash, and no other major wreckage followed. One fragment, one conclusion, case closed. But to those who looked deeper, that fragment raised one haunting question. If the plane didn't crash the way we were told, then what really happened to flight MH370? Because the truth wasn't at the bottom of the ocean. It was buried somewhere else, in silence, secrecy, and and selective revelation. When truth disappears, theories take its place. And in the void left by MH370, theories multiplied like smoke, each one darker than the last. The first was the simplest: pilot suicide. According to investigators, Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah had plotted a similar route on his home flight simulator, a route that ended in the southern Indian Ocean. They called it practice. They called it proof. But his friends, family, and colleagues said otherwise. Zaharieh was stable, experienced, dedicated. No signs of distress, no history of erratic behavior. And if he intended suicide, why fly 7 hours in silence into nowhere? Why switch off communications with surgical precision, yet leave the aircraft systems running long enough to be tracked by satellite? It didn't add up. Because suicide explains emotion, not precision. This disappearance was methodical. It was engineered. That led to the second theory, the hijacking. Some believed the plane was taken mid-air, rerouted toward a secret destination, perhaps even landed on a remote strip in Central Asia. Radar data supported it for a time. So did early military sightings from the Maldives and northern India. But no trace of a landing, no digital signal, no survivors ever emerged. And the governments nearest to the supposed route, including India, Pakistan, and Kazakhstan, all denied detecting anything unusual. Then came the third theory, mechanical failure. The idea that a slow decompression or electrical fault incapacitated the crew, leaving the plane on autopilot until fuel ran out. It was clean, plausible, tragic. But that explanation fell apart too, because someone, human, had manually changed the course. Someone had reprogrammed the flight computer after the last radio call, and that required intent. Which left the fourth theory, the one no one wanted to discuss: intervention. Some researchers argued that MH370 was carrying sensitive cargo, possibly defense-related technology, and that a foreign power intercepted it before it could reach Chinese territory. Others claimed the U.S. military base on Diego Garcia, located precisely within MH370's southern arc, could have been involved, accidentally or deliberately. The evidence? Circumstantial, but haunting. An intercepted signal detected by amateur radio operators. At the exact time the plane disappeared. A sudden blackout of nearby radar systems, officially blamed on maintenance. And weeks later, the Malaysian government classifying dozens of pages of radar logs under national security. Still, even the wildest theories had one thing in common. They filled a silence left by those who knew more than they would say. When truth is locked away, speculation becomes survival, and MH370 became a mirror, reflecting every fear we've ever had about control, technology, and the limits of transparency. Because somewhere between the pilot's calm voice, "Good night, Malaysian 370," and the silence that followed, someone made a decision powerful enough to erase a plane from the sky and patient enough to let the world believe it was an accident. When the official investigation closed in 2018, it ended not with clarity, but with confession. The Malaysian authorities admitted, "We cannot determine what happened to MH370. But buried in those 495 pages were fragments, anomalies so strange They seemed almost intentional. The first anomaly was in the satellite data. According to Inmarsat, the British satellite company that tracked MH370, the plane made a series of handshakes, pings between its system and the satellite, every hour after it vanished from radar. Those signals placed the aircraft on two possible routes, one north, one south. Yet only one was investigated, the southern path. Why? Because the northern one led over restricted airspace, past India, China, and Kazakhstan, nations with powerful radar coverage that reported seeing nothing. It was too inconvenient. So the official narrative steered south. The second anomaly came from military radar. For years, Malaysia claimed their radar lost MH370 minutes after its last radio contact, but leaked data later revealed otherwise. The plane had been tracked silently for over an hour, crossing the Malay Peninsula, turning northwest toward the Andaman Sea, before vanishing completely. And yet, those logs, the ones that could confirm its altitude, speed, and direction, were classified as sensitive national data, never released in full. The third anomaly hid inside the debris. Only a handful of fragments were ever recovered, and most were found thousands of kilometers from the official crash zone. A flaperon washed up on Réunion Island, barnacles clinging to its edges. Scientists studied those barnacles, and the results were troubling. Their growth patterns didn't match the Indian Ocean's currents or temperatures for the supposed crash timeline. Meaning, either the debris traveled in impossible ways, or it didn't come from where we were told it did. And then came the deleted data. When the US and Boeing were asked for MH370's maintenance logs and engine transmissions, data automatically sent to ground stations. Certain hours were missing, not corrupted, deleted. The same happened with Malaysia's air traffic control recordings from that night. The first 30 minutes after MH370 vanished, gone. Officials claimed technical error. But experts noticed those were the very minutes that could have revealed whether the disappearance was intentional or forced. By now, even insiders were speaking out. A member of the independent review team, requesting anonymity, said, "There are inconsistencies we were told not to pursue." Another admitted, "We were instructed to stop asking about the military radar data." And when journalists attempted to access communication between the Malaysian government and Boeing under international aviation law, the request was denied. The truth was no longer missing. It was restricted. Because sometimes the disappearance isn't the mystery. The investigation is. When a story is buried this deep, the question isn't what happened. It's who needed it to happen. By 2014, Malaysia Airlines was collapsing under debt. Billions lost, reputation shattered. But what if MH370 wasn't just a tragedy of error, but a transaction of silence? Weeks before the flight vanished, Malaysian intelligence was investigating a Chinese semiconductor firm called Freescale. 20 engineers, all top-level microchip specialists, were on board MH370 that night. They were working on radar systems and stealth technology, innovations capable of making aircraft invisible to detection. 20 of them, all gone. All names erased from Freescale's project logs after March 8, 2014. Coincidence or cleanup? because the patent they were finalizing, U.S. patent number 8,671,381, was filed under Freescale Semiconductor, owned by a group linked to the Carlyle Group, a global private equity firm with deep ties to defense and intelligence contractors. When the engineers disappeared, the controlling share of that patent transferred automatically to the company. The timing was perfect. Too perfect. And then there was the cargo. Official manifests listed 2.5 tons of lithium-ion batteries. Harmless, they said. Yet later investigations revealed an additional 89 kilograms of undisclosed equipment loaded in Kuala Lumpur just hours before takeoff. No explanation. No record of who signed it in. Only a manifest code known to military contractors. The theory grew darker. Was MH370 carrying technology that certain powers didn't want delivered? And if so, who intercepted it? Because if it crashed, someone would have found it. If it exploded, satellites would have seen it. But if it was taken, electronically redirected, jammed, or even landed, the silence makes sense. Investigators later found evidence of remote control capabilities in Boeing's autopilot system, allowing manual override from the ground in case of hijacking. It was called Uninterruptible Autopilot, a feature denied by Boeing for years, until declassified patents proved it existed. The more data you uncover, the clearer the pattern becomes. A flight vanishes. Data is sealed. Witnesses silenced. Questions redirected, and then life moves on. As if the story was never meant to end, just fade. But somewhere in the Indian Ocean, a mother still waits for a call that will never come. A son still checks flight paths on his phone every night. And 239 souls remain suspended between air and myth, between what we were told and what we were never meant to know. Because sometimes the truth doesn't disappear, it's classified.
Declassified Ages, where history reveals its secret. Like, share, and subscribe.